Hey everyone, this is Heather with Young and Savvy Genealogists, and today I'm going to be talking about how to create your own DNA match database. As you go through the process of taking a DNA test and trying to use it to make connections to cousins and other relatives to help you search for your common ancestors, there's quite a bit of analysis that goes into that process. And a really important tool that'll help you do that is a database, and I'm going to talk to you about how I set mine up and how it can help you to turn the numbers that make up your test results into relationships with other people. So if you're just starting out and there are some concepts or resources here that you're not familiar with, be sure to check out parts 1 through 3 of our genetic genealogy series. Parts 1 and 2 talk conceptually about a lot of the science and the concepts that you need to understand to do genetic genealogy, all of the numbers, what all of the important ones like that mean. Check out parts 1 and 2. And part 3 talks about what gedmatch.com is and the basics of how to use it. So if you find yourself needing those, you'll find links here and in the description below. So to get started, there are a couple of different programs that you can use to create a DNA database. The backbone of what you need is a spreadsheet. There are lots of different options for how you can make spreadsheets. Because I use Microsoft Office, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to show you concepts that are native to Microsoft Access and Microsoft Excel, but you can also use Google Docs and specifically Google Sheets. I know that it has a lot of the features that I'm talking about today. You can also use LibreOffice, OpenOffice, or WPS Office. I think all of those have spreadsheet components. I'm not as familiar with them or their features, so I can't vouch for that, but I do know that they do have accessibility to apps and mobile devices, as does Google Docs and Google Sheets. So if that's more something that you're looking for, you can look into that for yourself. There are tons of these types of programs for free, and every operating system has something that works best for it. So I'm not an Apple user, I'm not a Linux user. I don't know what programs you should use if you're in that situation, but I can say that Microsoft Office does provide all of the features that I'm going to be talking about today. In order to get access to Microsoft Excel, it's available in all packages of Microsoft Office, including the Student Edition. You can also use Microsoft Access, which is what I use, but it is only available in professional packages and higher. You can get discounts based on where you work if your employer provides a discount, which is how I got access to mine. Because my husband works for the government, he is able to get a professional package to Microsoft Office Professional for about $10, and that's how I originally came to start using Microsoft Access. So look for discounts if based on some of the stuff I share today, if that's something that interests you. And for all of you Evernote Power users out there, know that I am not one of you, so I cannot answer questions about Evernote. I do know that there are options that exist for embedding Google Sheets and Excel workbooks into Evernote. So if that's something that you want, know that it exists and it's out there, but I don't know how any of it works. So good luck with that. So in terms of setting up your spreadsheet, there's some information that you're going to want. Before you do anything else, are going to want to upload your results to GEDmatch, and after you do that, you're going to start working with kit numbers. The kit numbers start with 1 or 2 letters and then have 5 or 6 digits after them, and that is basically the equivalent of a name on GEDmatch, and you do tons with that kit number. So in some respects, it's more important than what the person's name or username is being able to track everything by kit number. So you're going to want that first. You're going to want the person's name, the contact information where you can reach that person, usually an email address. And then for every single person, you're going to want all of the chromosome data, the segment lengths that refer to that chromosome data, The SNP count, if it's provided, GEDmatch does. I know FamilyTreeDNA does not. You're going to want the starting point for that segment and the ending point for that segment. And again, GEDmatch and FamilyTreeDNA are the only companies that I've used so far that provide that information. AncestryDNA does not. And so as you're inputting this information, this is going to be the crux of how we do our analysis, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. You can input the estimated relationship. All of the DNA testing companies and GEDmatch provide estimated relationships for you and your cousin matches. Some of them are accurate, some of them are not. That's why they provide a range. And so you can input that information. I personally don't bother with it very much. You can put the most recent common ancestor or ancestors, and that you definitely want to do, because as you're looking for more cousin matches and trying to make these connections, as you look to the people that you already know how you're related to them and can start to identify other people who would be related to you in the same places, it's going to make it easier for you to find and identify people from lines that you're not familiar with. And so as you keep track of that information, that'll start to help you with that. I include a notes section where I include all of the other shared matches that I have with the people that I'm analyzing, and also theories as to how we might be related. Sometimes I'll put that in the most recent common ancestor file, some potential surnames or something, but most of those notes I put in the notes section. And then testing company. You want to be keeping track of where are these matches hosted on the internet, so that when you go to contact them or to look more closely and analyze them, you know where you're supposed to go to find them. Because I have results and test data at AncestryDNA, I upload it to FamilyTreeDNA, and I also work extensively with GEDmatch. Keeping all that information straight can be a struggle. So, providing yourself with that information on the testing company can be helpful as well, which I do as a checkbox feature in Access. The information that you want to be inputting into your database should be a reflection of all of the testing companies that you've either tested with or that have access to your DNA sample. And the features that you need to be looking for in a spreadsheet software are filters, sortable columns, they need to be searchable, and depending upon how you want to go about organizing things, you may want a spreadsheet software that uses multiple sheets. And I know that that's something you can find in Excel at the bottom. You'll see the little tabs that say Sheet 1, Sheet 2, and you can organize those, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And I know that Google Sheets also provides that same type of feature. So when you're using your spreadsheet, the process that you're going to use to start to analyze your results, you've already put in information and data from your cousin matches, and so now it's time to start analyzing them. And this is kind of the three-step process that you want to go through as you're doing this process. The first thing you want to do is filter or isolate your matches by chromosome number. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. Because I have all of my information in one spreadsheet under the hood in my Access database, I use filters to do this. And so in my spreadsheet, which you'll see in the next slide, I go up to the top, I click on the little triangle in the column, bring that open, and I can, through check boxes, check what chromosome or chromosomes I want to look at. And that's what I'll do first. If you don't necessarily want to do it that way and you want to have your stuff organized a little bit differently, one option that you have is in a spreadsheet software, you could create multiple sheets within a workbook and then have each chromosome be identified and organized on each sheet. So there's that option. Okay? Once you've got everything filtered and isolated by chromosome number, regardless of how you do that, you want to sort by the starting segment from least to greatest. And you'll see what that looks like on the next slide as well. And what that's going to tell you is that you're going to see where multiple different people, their DNA segments are going to begin and end in roughly the same places. Or they might start a little bit before, end a little bit before, and so you're going to see some overlap. Okay? That is what you want to find, because the people who have this line segment overlap or begin and end in the same places, those are people who could potentially be related to each other and therefore descend from the same ancestors. And as you compare these cousins to each other to see if they're related, you're going to confirm or deny that relationship. This is a cross-section of my spreadsheet. I've edited it to remove all contact information and names. And so here you'll see kit numbers, you'll see the gender of the person, you'll see the chromosomes where I match them, you'll see the segment length right there. Those are the numbers with the decimals. You'll see the SNP count, the starting point of the segment, and the ending point of the segment. And primarily we're going to talk about these last two columns right here. You'll see as you scroll down this list in these last two columns, these numbers aren't that dissimilar from each other. And if you think of these as a line that starts here and ends there, you see that these would roughly line up with each other straight down in a row. Okay, and then as you go beyond that point, you can see, well, this one starts a little bit after the rest of these, but ends in roughly the same place. And, the same thing with the one after that. And then as you go down the list, you see that, well, these numbers aren't really all that similar anymore. But then you see where the same thing starts to happen down here with, like, the 151. They start in roughly the same place, end in, like, a little bit of a staggered fashion, but kind of in the same places. And this is what you want to see. You want to see multiple people that have this same information lining up like this. And as you compare them one-to-one with each other on GEDmatch, or you can use the chromosome browser in FamilyTreeDNA, or whatever testing company you've used with it, isn't AncestryDNA, because they don't have any of this. As you do that, you're going to start to see whether or not these people are related to each other. And what does that tell you? That tells you which side of your family that they're related to you on. So let's say with some of these kit numbers, I compare maybe 4 or 5 of them, and they're all related to each other, and they're related to me. And then I go through the second half of this blue section, and they're all related to each other, but they're not related to the other people in the blue section. So what does that tell me? What that tells me is that some of them are related to me on my mom's side, and some of them are related to me on my dad's side. And conceptually, you need to think about this, and I've used this analogy before, as 2 overhead transparencies that are on top of each other. Because when we're looking at our chromosomes, for each number chromosome, so for chromosome 6 here, I have 2 of those. One from my mom and one from my dad. And the same is true for pretty much every other human that's out there. So you need to think of these 2 chromosomes from each of your parents sitting on top of each other, and they have all of this data that you've inherited from all of these other ancestors and that you share with all of these other people. In order to find the relationships that you're looking for, you need to start to separate them so you can see clearly what's happening there. And where things line up in the same place, and they match one side but not the other side, that's where you start to be able to separate this image and see, well, this is going to be because half of it comes from my mom and half of it comes from my dad. That process is called phasing, and you can literally start to see that story unravel in these numbers here as you compare them with each other. And that's some of the stuff that you want to be taking track of in your notes section. One other quick observation is in this table where you see that I don't have kit numbers for people, that is specifically because these people have tested on FamilyTreeDNA and have not, as far as I know, uploaded their results to GEDmatch. And because GEDmatch is the best way to be able to have this comparison to the most number of people, what I can then do is reach out to some of these people and let them know that GEDmatch exists and that there are all these cousin matches that they could be taking advantage of if they used it. that it's completely free and that, this is what they stand to gain by using this website, or even to ask them if they're already using it and I just haven't identified them yet. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind as you move forward, and some other tricks and questions that you need to ask yourself as well. So as you start to input this data, you're going to realize that most people that you're matching with match you on one chromosome in one place. Sometimes you'll come across people that might match you on two different chromosomes, or on one chromosome in two different places. So you've got two segments or more that you can look at. There are a couple different schools of thought that you can, kind of address in how to handle this. As I mentioned before, if you want to separate each chromosome out into multiple sheets within a workbook, this problem mostly goes away for Excel, so that's kind of how you can address it. But if you want to have all of that information into one spreadsheet, if you only have information for one chromosome, like one set of columns where you can put that information in, you're going to have to put that information into the spreadsheet twice for all of the different segments that you have. So let's say I'm related to Betsy Ross or whatever, and I match her in two different places. I match her on chromosome 2 and I match her on chromosome 6. So one option is to put her into the database twice, once for each chromosome, and I can do it that way. That takes longer. It's a replication of effort, and for me, I found myself when I first set my stuff up, that's how I was doing it, and I was deleting stuff that I thought was duplicates, and it really wasn't, and so I was creating a big disaster area that I had to go back and clean up afterwards. And as I thought about it, I decided that I wanted to have all of the data for each person on one line in the spreadsheet. And while that solved a lot of problems, it potentially created some other ones. And the reason I point this out is because if you try to do it this way in Excel, it's not going to work very well for you. So part of how you would even set this up is that you, like the information that I pointed out before, where you have chromosome, the segment length, the starting point, the ending point, and the SNPs, you input that in there, and for me, I have it labeled as, segment A. So it's, chromosome A, and segment A, and starting point A, and ending point A, and then I have B, and C, and D, and E. You could do it that way if you wanted to, and then hide all of the extra fields when you're not using them, which is what I do. And the reason that I do that is because I'm not using Excel. I use Access. And the tool that I use to overcome some of the other issues that it creates is something called a query, which allows me to search in multiple columns at once. And it just works the way that I want it to, with the work style that I have come up with. And part of why I'm pointing this out is because you don't want to do it the way that I do it in Excel, because I don't think it has the tools with the query to be able to do this. Because if you try to set up everything in one table, when you go to sort your columns, your information isn't going to line up entirely. So, say that, in the previous slide I had all of my matches for chromosome 6, and I'm talking about my match Betsy Ross, and I match her on chromosome 2 and chromosome 6. When I go to match all of the information in column A, like I do for most of my information, because that's where it is for most people, there are going to be a few matches that I have where the chromosome that I'm looking at isn't going to be in that column. So again, because I use Access and use queries, it's not an issue for me, because I can work around that and it works just fine. But for those of you that are using Excel, it's not going to line up like that. And so that's just something to keep in mind as you're setting things up. So one of the other things that is going to become the bane of your existence as you use GEDmatch are people who upload multiple samples for the same person. The way that you can identify those is through the one-to-one comparison, and the options that show up there. There's an option for a chromosome graphic, and you're going to choose yes. You input the two kit numbers that you're looking at to see if they're the same person or not. And as you run the search, the bars that show up on the graphic are going to be a solid blue and solid green bar. Now, why would you want to know this? Because when you're building this database, you're talking about inputting information for literally hundreds of people. My database at this point is probably fast approaching 1,100 different samples, and that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people to be keeping information for, and the more information you put in there, the bigger the database is going to get, and the more cumbersome it is to use it, especially if as you're running these analysis, you're running into kits for the same people. Being able to avoid doing this to yourself saves you work, it saves you time, it saves you headache. And what I have run into as an issue before is that I would generally just pick one kit and say, you know what, this is the only kit that I'm going to look at, I'll put it in my database, fine, the issue's done with. But then these people wise up and realize that they're creating a disservice to everybody, delete some of their duplicate kits, and the kit number that I chose ultimately to associate with that person is one of the kits that gets deleted. And then if they change their display name on GEDmatch, I have literally no way of finding this person again. And I just wasted all of that time and energy putting it into my spreadsheet. So what I do as I'm working is I look for duplicate kits if I suspect that there is one. And for every duplicate kit that I can find, I just put those kit numbers, comma, and then another kit number, and comma, and another kit number, into my spreadsheet that way so that I cover all of my bases. But really, the best way to avoid this is just to not upload duplicate samples, and it would be really wonderful if people could just stop doing that. So once you get a fair amount of data into your spreadsheet or spreadsheets, and you are starting to move forward with your analysis, it's like any other research project. You decide what your focus is going to be, and you work through it and see what you find, and the best results are going to come with when you start with what you know and then branch out into what you don't know. So you've got some options, and you can try a little bit of everything, but the places that you'll definitely want to start first are with these 2 bullet points right here. You want to start with the matches where you already know who your common ancestor or common ancestors are. So I have a cousin match where even before I reached out to him, I was fairly certain that we were related on my father's side. And I was pretty sure that it was going to be a Doyle connection because of another cousin match that I'd already made with a Doyle ancestor. And so I sent him a message and I said, this is how I think we're related. Are you able to confirm this theory for me? I'd love to share some of the information that I've already found on this line of my family, if so, and gave him my email address and all that stuff. Didn't hear back from him for more than a year, and that's something you need to be prepared for. Is not everyone that you reach out to is going to write back right away. But even so, it's worth doing. Because what happened with this cousin is he reached a point in his life where he was curious and wanting to work through his ancestry again. And when he saw my message, he reached out to me and said, yes, this is how we're related. This is where our connection is. And he was a lot closer to this line of my family than I have been throughout my life, and has gone to family reunions and stuff like that. And he said, I have pictures of our common ancestors. Have you ever seen them before, and would you like to see them? And I'm like, oh heck yes I would. I've never seen pictures of these people. Please let me know and send them to me, and I'd love to see them. And because of that is one of the great things that genetic genealogy can do for you. You make connections with people that you never would have met in any other circumstance probably, and you're able to get access to information and media and stories that you never would have heard in any other way. And even though this particular line of my family wasn't the focus of my DNA test, Even knowing this much more about my sample is helpful to me in reaching those points, because now every time I find someone who is related to me and is also related to this cousin, I know that they're not related to me in one of those other lines. And so I've begun the process of elimination, and these other samples that have no connection to anyone that I'm familiar with, they start to come out and I can recognize them for what they are. And so with a lot of these other options that you have here, you're going to go through that same process of phasing the data between your mother and your father, trying to figure out the common ancestor, comparing what you know to what you don't know in order to flush out the information, reaching out to other people to see what they know, and as time goes on, you gather this information and you start to make progress. And the numbers turn into real relationships that you not only identify with your common ancestors, but with the living descendants and with living family you didn't realize you had. And so some of the other projects that you can do that'll help you to do this are looking at the closest relationships you have, which you can identify by the longest segment length, that's the decimal point number. The larger that number is and the higher the SNP count is, the more closely related you are with somebody. And those of you who are adoptees that are trying to use this to find your birth parents, the biggest favor that you can do yourself is to look at the closest relationships that you can find to your cousin matches. If you're looking at, segments that are 7 centimorgans long and have a SNP count of about 500, those are people that are pretty distantly related to you. And it's going to be a lot of work and a lot of descendancy research through probably a half dozen generations before you're going to get to the generation that even has your birth parents in it. You're talking about doing descendancy research for hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Why do that to yourself when you can look at the closest relationships that you can find and ideally only have to go through maybe 2 or 3 generations before you find your birth parents? You choose the battle that you want to have with your DNA sample. And the way that you do that is through the type of research that you decide to do. And so that's my recommendation to you adoptees, is to start with the closest relationships that you can find. And the great thing about doing a DNA sample is that that is something quantitative that you can measure, identify, and sort by in a spreadsheet. Okay? A couple other options that you have here, you can start with matches with segments on multiple chromosomes, and I explained the benefit of doing that, especially with phasing, because then as you start to separate those overhead transparencies of your chromosomes, the stories start to emerge. And so for this particular cousin with these photos that I told you about, he matches me on 5 different chromosomes. And so on each one of those chromosomes, every time I find someone who lines up in the same place on that chromosome as he does and is related to him, I already know that they are part of my Doyle family. They match me on my father's side. And then as I start to look at those chromosomes in the same places, if they don't match him, I know that they match me on my mother's side. And so I start to be able to unravel that puzzle for multiple chromosomes by just looking at one person. And so that can be a great benefit to you as well. Some other projects that you can do are looking at the greatest number of hits for a common segment. So, if you had 30 people that all line up on the same segment, reach out to some of them and maybe they've already figured it out. And then you've already taken 30 people off the list that you don't have to think about anymore. You've got all matches on a single chromosome. So if you just wanted to focus on chromosome 6 because it's the one that has the most matches on it, you could do it that way. If you invite someone to take a DNA test and they're a distant cousin and you just want to focus on all of the shared matches that you have with that person, that is something that you can do. Regardless of how you decide to move forward, you're going to learn stuff. And you want to be writing down what you learn so you don't have to relearn stuff. A lot of the same habits that you've built in how to be a successful paper genealogist are going to be the same habits that benefit you in being a successful genetic genealogist. And just to close out, I wanted to share with you one of the things that I got out of my connection with my cousin that I made. So these are some of the pictures that he sent me. These are my 2 times great grandparents, Charles Miller Doyle and Bertie Mae Price. Because the family dynamic of my father's family is such that, in the recent generations, they kind of severed ties with the rest of their family through sort of some prodigal son type of relationships. These people had children that they hadn't had contact with in probably decades. And so all of us as their descendants through those particular lines didn't have any connections to them, didn't know they existed, have never seen pictures of them. And now for the first time in my life, I have seen pictures of my 2 times great grandparents. I can look into their faces and I can see how much they look like my grandfather. I can see the farmhouse that they lived in. I can see the car that they drive. Or that they drove. I can see this flag that I know nothing about that may help me to solve some of the mysteries about where my Doyle ancestors came from. I'm trying to figure out where they came from in Ireland. This flag may be the only clue that exists. I don't know. Even the bike to see what it looked like. These are the types of things that you start to discover as you use your DNA test properly to solve the mysteries that you're trying to solve. It is possible to flush out the human element of these numbers. And by doing some of these very basic things and these research techniques, you will be able to have these types of results for yourself. Thank you for joining us for our presentation. As I said, definitely be sure to check out parts 1 through 3. And if you want to connect with us further, be sure to check out our blog at youngandsavvygenealogist.blogspot.com. And you can check out other videos, which you'll see a link there. And also be sure to check out our Facebook group, where you can connect with other young and savvy genealogists or some of our older ambassadors who decide to join us there as well. We've got a growing community of young genies who are trying to connect with each other. And so be sure to check out our Facebook group, and links to all of those things you can find in the description. Thanks for stopping by with us, and we hope to see you again.